Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at Battlefield 6, the open beta using the RTX 5060. We're using the MSI Shadow 2X version of the card. It's just a simple MSRP 2-fan model of the card with that measly 8GB of GDDR7 video memory, playing on the latest NVIDIA drivers and pairing with the 9800 X3D as well as 64GB of DDR5 RAM. This will ensure that our bottleneck is in fact our GPU. Now, from our previous testing, I am aware that this game does use the transformer model, so no need for us to go in and modify anything. It's already using a pretty advanced model of DLSS. However, this is the first 8GB card that I have tested, so we'll see how it performs. Let's hop in. All right, we're starting off here at 1080p. We're going to be starting off with the high preset, playing at native resolution here. Again, it does have DLSS, and it does, I believe, have that DLSS transformer model. So pretty nice version of DLSS. It was bugged for a period of time, though it seems to be fixed. And you can see just how close it's expecting us to be for our video memory, even at 1080p. So that'll be our main point of concern when it comes to this particular GPU. 8GB is pretty tough, even though this game has shown to be pretty well optimized. We'll see how this actually performs. So otherwise, keeping everything completely stock. Only thing I adjusted here is just turning down motion blur, but otherwise native 1080p at high settings. And we will be playing on this Conquest mode, which is just that classic 32v32 mode. It's really like the iconic Battlefield mode. Now, loading in here, we'll go ahead and begin counting. And you can see right away, while this is definitely a playable frame rate, it is a pretty significant notch down from what we saw on some other GPUs. Our video memory doesn't seem to be a major point of concern so far, though this isn't, what I could consider to be a competitive FPS. It is well above 60 FPS with pretty respectable 1% low, sitting right around 70. So, the 5060 is certainly, marketed as a 1080p card. So really what we're looking for is ideally, at least a playable frame rate at 1080p high settings, which would be like 60 frames. Although in a game like this, a competitive like first-person shooter, I would like to see, or like to get, rather, closer to like 100, 120 FPS. Now, we'll see if that's actually going to be possible at native. It doesn't really seem like it is, unfortunately, though. That's where definitely having DLSS is certainly going to be very, very nice. But, especially like indoor area like this, you'll get slightly higher. So this is where you're seeing 90, and once we go out and there's more going on, we'll likely see that dip slightly. But overall, pretty decent performance here. Can definitely play here, and we are on high settings. So, I don't think if you have like a modern GPU, anything that come out in the past few years, I don't think that you really want to be playing on anything less than like medium settings. I was hoping that high settings would be able to get us, around 120 FPS natively, though that does not actually seem to be the case. So we will dip down to medium in a moment here to see if that does get us a native like 120 or even slightly higher FPS. And really what I've experienced in this game is it looks pretty solid regardless of the graphic settings. It's hard to really make this game look too ugly. Even if you go down to those medium settings, the game still visually looks pretty impressive. But around 95 or so FPS here on native 1080p high, so definitely playable, no doubt about that. But me personally, I think for a first-person shooter, if you're playing on mouse and keyboard, playing on PC, you'd probably want a bit higher. Now, when we come into our advanced settings here, this is kind of our video options. You will see that we have quite a few options here, so we'll go ahead and right away we'll throw on DLSS. I'm just actually going to leave it at quality. I actually think that that is going to be enough to get us there. And one thing to keep in mind, I'm not going to test it at this very moment, but there is multi-frame generation. So there's the normal 2x, but it does go all the way up to 4x frame generation. So that is nice to have, though not something I would really recommend in a multiplayer title like this. So now on DLSS quality, which really at 1080p DLSS quality using that transformer model looks probably better than TAA in most instances. So not really a super great reason not to use this. And while this doesn't bring us all the way quite as high as I really anticipated it to bring us, it doesn't give us that 120 kind of loose mark that I'm kind of looking for a multiplayer title. Does give us a pretty considerable boost, now jumping all the way up into about 100 FPS, and really can consistently in that kind of 100 FPS range. So definitely a much nicer experience here, both in terms of a slight boost to our FPS. It's not really the major thing here, but really the thing that it's really accomplishing is just giving us a much sharper looking image here. I mean, this looks considerably sharper. TAA is a really cheap form of anti-aliasing if you want to play at native resolution, but really the transformer model is so good that quality upscaling on the transformer model, even at 1080p, looks, in my opinion, better than native using TAA. So although it doesn't shoot us into that 120 range, I would definitely prefer playing here as opposed to that TAA native setting. So let's bump down one more, and even balance should look pretty solid here. And we'll go ahead and begin counting now on those high settings using balanced DLSS. I typically wouldn't go much further than like a balance type setting for our upscaling when we're at a 1080p resolution, though on the transformer model it may not be too bad. But as you can see, you know, indoor areas we are now reaching that 120 FPS mark at times, though not super consistently. But the other thing that's really reassuring to see is that even with the upscaling, we're still hitting a really nice and consistent 1% low, leading to a really smooth experience here. So that's really, you know, far more important than a high FPS like the 10 FPS that we're kind of searching for here. While that would be nice, it's not nearly as important as just kind of getting, you know, those frames that you are getting and getting them delivered smoothly, which we are seeming to get. Here on high settings, the game does look pretty incredible. This is just a really good looking game, and it uses that Frostbite engine that's been around for years now, bespoke engine for the Battlefield series, and you know, like custom made for the Battlefield series. So really nice to see that not only does it look so great, but it's offering us pretty solid performance. Now getting slight boost to our FPS, looks like, as you can see, at times 120, but really averaging about a 10 FPS increase over the quality upscaling option. So definitely pretty happy with the performance here as well at balance, both in terms of our FPS and the visuals. Looks absolutely great. And just while we're here, let's go ahead and crank all the way down to ultra performance. We'll see how this looks first of all, and then see how it performs. So ultra performance, while the transformer model is incredibly impressive, asking for ultra performance of any sort of upscaling model at 1080p is a pretty Herculean task. You can see movement of some objects as that guy goes flying here. It's maybe kind of hard to tell in a compressed YouTube video, but it is pretty noticeable. Just there's a bit of like just this shimmery aspect. If you stand still, it's not super noticeable. It's really objects in motion. It may be hard to pick up in the video, but we are definitely getting a higher FPS. And really, if I was just like not being a snob, just coming in here and playing the game, you know, it's very likely I wouldn't even really care all that much. But because I am, you know, trying to get, you know, really, you know, good look at it here, it is pretty evident that there are some things that aren't being rendered super well. That's not really the fault of the model so much as just, you know, the fact of playing at a lower resolution. Oftentimes, you know, we'll do that when you're using a really aggressive form of upscaling. But that this does now bring us into that competitive FPS, sitting right around 127 or so, climbing at times on our average. You can see maybe like if I zoom in on these trees here, I'll go ahead and zoom in a moment. You can see when we kind of run across, there's like just this kind of blurry effect. It's not super noticeable if you're just kind of going through and playing the game, but if you're looking for it, if you're the type of person who is, you know, picky when it comes to that sort of thing, I do think it is certainly pretty noticeable. So do keep that in mind. It's nice to have the transform model, and it does look good in a lot of use cases, but fast motion like this is definitely where you start to kind of notice some of those drawbacks. Now, I don't love the fact that we're having to do this already at 1080p, but it is what it is. We're bumping down to medium, and I just want to see what kind of performance we can get here on medium native resolution, so using the TAA for anti-aliasing. Alright, so this is actually pretty surprising performance we're getting here. So moving down to the medium preset, down from high, actually gave us a massive boost here, way more than I was expecting. So pretty much brought us from, we're around like 80 FPS or so, 80 to 90 FPS on high settings at native. And now we are on a different map, but as you can see, we're getting nearly double the FPS, averaging about 140 right now. And while I will say, you know, high does look better in some instances, and I've done some side-by-side testing myself, as that was a crazy effect there, but it is pretty crazy just how large of a improvement we are getting here just by moving from high over to medium. So I would say that honestly, if you are not happy with the performance that you're getting here at 1080p, I would personally rather just bump down to medium, and you know, you're going to be getting already just by default to start with, before you even introduce any sort of upscaling, you're going to be getting a much better experience here. As you can see, around 142, it still looks great. I mean, you see the reflections, tons of detail, like fire effects, everything looks really solid here, and we're getting this natively before even introducing DLAA or the quality preset on the transformer model here. So really happy with the performance here at medium. I think this is certainly where I would prefer to play on at 1080p. And things were looking a little bit bleak, I'll be honest, when we talk about, you know, moving forward into 1440p and even testing out 4K. But the fact that we were able to reclaim so much FPS at 1080p by bumping down to medium does make those options look a little more realistic. We'll hop into another match, try out some of our DLSS settings now. So let's see what these DLSS settings can do. So we're just going to go for quality here. We're not really looking for higher FPS. We're already getting incredibly high FPS, but on the transformer model here, really what you're looking for is a sharper image. So when we move over to this medium preset, it gives us a lot more flexibility when it comes to our FPS, because we're already operating from such a high place. So we know natively at TAA we're getting like around 150, 160. So it's kind of what we're expecting here at quality, and maybe even a slight boost here. So quality 1080p, again, like I said, looks essentially native. In my opinion, in a lot of instances, it would actually look slightly better than TAA at native. So even though we are upscaling, just the model of upscaling that we're using is just so sophisticated that it turns out, you know, looking much better. So getting around, honestly, pretty similar FPS, maybe a slight boost. Again, this is a different map, and every map in this game performs slightly differently when it comes to the FPS. It's not like night and day difference, but you will see maybe like a, you know, 5 to 10% change in FPS depending on the map and the vehicles and what exactly is going on. But getting essentially the same performance, probably, you know, reasonably a little bit higher performance, and a sharper looking image with this transformer model too, and more control over the sharpness. Being able to actually go in and change that is certainly nice, independent of just the general sharpening slider. And across the board here, all of our settings, our video memory does not seem to be an issue at 1080p at least. Now, I anticipate it will be when we move up in resolution. If we were to introduce a bit of frame generation, I think that would also maybe push us into a wall when it comes to our video memory. But at least at 1080p without the frame generation, everything is working totally fine. So if you're looking for a 1080p experience, 5060 is going to be serving you just fine in this game. All right, now moving up to 1440p, we're going to be starting off on the medium preset here at native TAA. All right, so bumping up to 1440p obviously immediately has a pretty significant effect on our performance. So basically halves our FPS again. I feel like we're kind of chasing FPS at this point. Now, our video memory is sitting pretty high, around 7 gigabytes. Now, video memory is one of those things that's kind of hard. It's kind of difficult to monitor in monitoring software. Sometimes the amount of video memory that's shown in allocation in something like representative statistics is not always 100% accurate to what's actually being used. So it's very possible that this could now be our 8 gigabytes kind of struggling a bit here, which we should be able to tell as soon as we introduce a bit of upscaling, kind of giving our video memory a break. If our FPS kind of skyrockets up to like, you know, 160 FPS, be pretty evident that that is maybe what's causing it. But honestly, even if our video memory is the cause of the drop in our FPS, the drop is not super significant to the point where it's now becoming a unplayable experience or anything like that. Not even close, really. I mean, even if you want to be a snob about it, I don't think that very many people can really make the argument that, you know, 80, 90 FPS is an unplayable experience. It seems to me here that while maybe some people, myself included, maybe wouldn't consider this to be like a competitive FPS, meaning that, you know, if I was really looking to perform and win, there may be some instances where I may be at a competitive disadvantage to someone who is getting that 120 FPS. It's really not super significant where that would really be the case. Super common. Like, I think, you know, if you're like 40 FPS, obviously you're at a, you know, a competitive disadvantage to someone getting 60 plus or 100 plus FPS. But if we're looking at like a 95 FPS average, which is right about what we're getting here, it's not going to be a major difference, but it is worth keeping an eye on. Now, this is at native using TAA, which, again, because we have that transform model, and I can't even, you know, express how important having a good model when we're looking at, you know, this minute difference when it comes to FPS is really going to be really important when we are looking at, you know, looking for a somewhat similar looking image and also just trying to reclaim just a little bit of that FPS. So let's do just that. Let's go ahead and throw on DLSS just to quality to begin with here. So really not looking for a ton of improvements to our FPS, really just looking to like maybe add like 10, 15 FPS to get into a bit of a more competitive place. You can see our 1% lows are okay. They certainly could be better here, but they're not, you know, resulting in a super unplayable experience or anything like that. But enabling this quality mode does a few things. It does result in a much cleaner looking picture than TAA here. The image just looks a lot sharper, a lot crisper, a lot cleaner, and we are also now getting a slight boost to our FPS. We're talking about maybe like, you know, maybe about 20 or so FPS increase, somewhere between 15 and 20. It's not like night and day difference as far as what I'm experiencing or feeling here, but it's enough. And again, really the benefit here is that we're getting this increase in FPS with really no drawbacks whatsoever. In fact, in my opinion, we're actually getting a benefit here of getting, you know, a slightly better looking picture. So really, if you're going to be playing at medium settings here, I would recommend throwing on DLSS. Even if it's just quality DLSS, it's going to result in a much nicer looking picture, and it's going to give you a slight boost. Now, if you wanted a bit more here, let's go ahead and we'll just check out the balance preset briefly here. This should now get us pretty close into that 120 FPS range, where now I'm considering this to be pretty much a competitive FPS. Many TVs, you know, are 120 hertz. That's kind of like the norm nowadays, due to the fact that, you know, consoles are kind of targeting 120 FPS or 120 hertz as their like performance mode. So you see a lot of hardware at around 120 FPS. PC monitors still seem to be kind of targeting 144 hertz typically, but you can see we are getting pretty substantial boost to our FPS here, and we are now getting, you know, that 120 range in a much more like reliable manner here. So definitely, as you can see, hitting a nice little string of kills here. Definitely able to perform here, and the picture quality going down to balance. Transform model is incredible, guys. So going down to balanced, really in motion you might be able to tell some blurriness, some weirdness, but really it's not going to make a world of difference for us here or look like considerably worse. In fact, in my opinion, it looks essentially the same. Really no major difference here. So next up here at 1440p, let's see if we can make the high preset work here at all. Now I do think, and it's actually already indicating that this is going to be pushing us past our expected video memory limit, even though I haven't even turned on DLSS yet. So turning off DLSS, going back to TAA. And again, I just kind of want to see, you can see just how this is showing that the game alone is expected to use kind of a bit more than it's wanting to. Now, it's still under like our technical video memory limit, or a theoretical limit here, but we'll see how moving over to high at native 1440p looks here. Now here at native high settings, this is where we will definitely, as I spawned behind that gate there, but we'll definitely need to keep an eye on our video memory. You can see it is creeping up a little bit, where we're seeing about 7,100 megabytes. Now we're at 7,600 megabytes, so getting close to our 8 gigabyte allotment here. Though, you know, typically signs of running out of video memory are like really terrible 1% lows, which we're actually not seeing right now. In fact, we're not really seeing super different performance, medium to high here, surprisingly. So it's interesting that we were seeing such different performance, medium to high at 1080p. But regardless here, you know, high settings, again, it's kind of the same place we've been at before, around 60 FPS. 60 plus FPS, 86 on our average so far here. Definitely playable, but, you know, on something about playing on mouse and keyboard, playing on PC, 60 FPS may be acceptable on consoles or even like good on consoles, but on PC, something about playing just at 60 FPS when you're maybe used to playing at a higher FPS doesn't quite feel as good as it does on console. I mean, on console, 60 FPS feels like, you know, you're playing at a, you know, incredibly performant mode, but here, even getting like 85 on our average here doesn't feel super great. But it does not seem to be that our bottleneck is our video memory, even at 1440p high settings. So that is certainly nice to see. So good news is that I do think that we are going to be able to reclaim that FPS and get an improvement just with the use of that DLSS. But really, main takeaway here, in my opinion, moving from medium to high is just that there's not a major difference in our actual visual quality. I don't think that, you know, I think Benchmark King, he does videos where he kind of breaks down the different graphics presets. I'm not sure if he's planning on doing a Battlefield 6 video. Probably, and I imagine when he comes in and toys with this that there will be some pretty interesting takeaways just due to the fact that I'm not really seeing a major difference when it comes to some of our settings here. So, which is a good thing in some ways. I mean, the game still looks great at medium settings. Some stuff maybe looks better, like the lighting, things like that. I guess I would need to see side by side, but some differences perhaps, but don't expect them to be super significant here. So let's come in and let's throw on DLSS. We'll leave it at balance for now and see how that does. And balance DLSS here again on that transform model looks essentially native, looks really great. Don't think it looks like considerably better than native TAA now that we're at 1440p necessarily. But it does give us a slight boost to our FPS, and now we're getting a little bit higher and looks like essentially the same. It's not like super noticeable the difference in our upscaling here. Still looks obviously great on these high settings and still really respectable when it comes to our 1% lows. Have to say this Frostbite engine, it's almost like they just like don't really make games like this anymore that are pretty, you know, relatively well optimized and also, you know, still look really solid. It's like there's not really any major compromises being made to achieve a high FPS. We're getting good looking visuals, you know, good 1% lows, and generally just good FPS in general. So it does look like high settings here are definitely on the table. Balance will bring you into a slightly more competitive rate, not quite at that 120 mark that I kind of like to be at, but relatively close here. Now at 1440p, we are able to kind of come in here and go to ultra performance. It's not going to result in as bad of a picture quality here. So let's see what ultra performance DLSS, again, we're on that high graphics preset right now. Let's see what this looks like. So turning over to ultra performance here, this does now pretty much skyrocket us as far as our FPS into a competitive range here. While, you know, let's see, like the motion, now that we're at 1440p, honestly, a lot of those issues that we were seeing at 1080p don't really seem to be at nearly as bad. You can see fire effects even in motion here still look pretty solid. There's not really any like weird blurriness on the trees, things like that we were noticing at 1080p. I'm sure they are there if you were to look super closely, but in general here, basically this is like, you know, perfect use case for DLSS, taking a relatively high FPS already, getting it a bit higher while already, you know, giving you a pretty clean looking image. So really 1440p, this game is really well optimized. So 1440p with the use of a bit of DLSS, or, you know, if you're okay with slightly lower FPS, you don't even really need to upscale, but upscaling will get you really well and solidly into that higher FPS range that, you know, you'd probably be after here in a competitive shooter type game. So really happy generally with the performance here. I think that there's definitely a lot of room to kind of pick and choose what you prioritize as far as like visuals versus FPS. Get a really solid range, and video memory, based on our 1% lows and the smoothness that we were getting here, doesn't really seem to be an issue on medium or high settings here. Now, our next and final resolution here, 4K, I imagine this is going to need some help from our DLSS, but just to see what we can get at native, just for the fun of it, see if we can run into that video memory allotment. Certainly seems to think that we are going to be well over our video memory here. Let's start off just medium settings here at 4K native TAA. So here at medium and native settings, although it thought that our video memory was going to be an issue, it doesn't actually seem that, at least on medium settings, that our video memory is really a concern. In fact, we are slightly lower than we were on these higher settings at 1440 and 1080p, even at this higher resolution. So obviously we're at sub 60 FPS here at native medium settings, so that pretty much takes native off the table for any settings going forward here. But really happy to see that at least our video memory is able to push the frames for 4K, even if it's not really giving us type of performance that you may want to see in a first-person shooter like this. So let's see where some DLSS can get us. So immediately we're going to throw on DLSS, and let's go straight for balanced here. And balanced does now give us a 60 plus FPS experience here. So really not much upscaling, and especially, you know, balanced on the performance model at 4K resolution. It's going to be giving you a really great looking picture. Now we are in medium settings, which maybe wouldn't feel the best here, and we will test out high settings before we finish today. But obviously, you know, this is not a 4K card, the 5060. I don't think it's, you know, anyone's disillusioned that this was marketed or meant as a 4K GPU. But really, it's a GPU that, you know, can really punch above its weight just with the help of DLSS. Because despite the fact that, you know, NVIDIA GPUs get a lot of heat, one thing that is pretty unanimous is just how good the DLSS model is. Now, that's not exclusive to the 50 series. Really, the only part of DLSS that's exclusive to the 50 series is the multi-frame generation, which it's a nice feature, but not something that I really love personally, and not something that I would recommend for a competitive multiplayer game. I think, you know, when we get to, if we're playing like a single player title, or if there's a single player mode in this game and you want to use multi-frame generation, the latency doesn't bother you. But me personally, I don't even want to have the option or the thinking that, oh, I would have won that gunfight had I not had the added bit of latency. Not something that I really want to even, you know, introduce into the equation. But regardless, you can see here at medium settings, you are able to get 60 plus FPS just by going over to the balanced preset, which honestly, like I said, you know, 4K is such a high resolution, as is that balanced here looks really solid in my opinion. Now, before we move over to some different graphics presets, let's see what we can do just at ultra performance. So this is now using the most aggressive form of upscaling, pretty much the highest FPS that you are going to get here at medium settings at 4K. Gives obviously the GPU a bit of a break, though it is still pulling its max wattage, I'm pretty sure across the board, which is good to see. Our GPU was at full utilization across 1080p, 1440p, and of course now 4K, really kind of pushing the GPU to its max. Definitely what you want to see in a benchmark here. But ultra performance, even here, does give us a slight FPS boost where we were getting around 60. Now we're getting around 75 on our average right now, so it is certainly giving us an improvement, though it's not super major or life-changing or anything like that. If you want to play at, you know, highest possible FPS here, certainly could do that and get a, you know, pretty consistent 60 plus FPS experience. Our 1% lows are sitting right around 55. Pretty smooth experience if you're okay with playing at 60 FPS. You have a 4K monitor. You could do this without introducing any frame generation, but you know, I wasn't going to benchmark it, but just to see, just for fun, what that multi-frame generation can do, we'll go ahead and jump in and apply that 4x just to see what kind of fake frames we can actually get here. So again, we'll go ahead, jump in. We're already at DLSS Ultra Performance, so getting, you know, the highest possible FPS just with the upscaling. But now let's go ahead and introduce straight to the 4x multiplier for our frame generation. Now for this one, we could counter FPS here, though. The 1% low is not super indicative, so it's really just going to help get us an average. So you can kind of ignore the 1% low for this particular test, as well as the frame time graph. But As far as our frames here, you can see obviously 4x frame generation gives us a massive, massive boost. Though I will say, you know, we were operating from already a kind of high FPS, and in a single player game, you know, the latency may not bother me, but in this multiplayer type title, I can certainly really notice the latency. So if you're curious, you know, just at medium settings here, what could you do at 4K, ultra performance, 4x frame generation, and you are looking at a competitive FPS now at 4K around 150. So wouldn't recommend doing this, but if you're curious, yes, you can do it. You can get, you know, a competitive type FPS, but you're pretty much, you know, calling it competitive here with the added latency is pretty much invalidating, and it's especially noticeable. You notice, you can probably even see my mouse pointer, the latency moving my mouse around, how the kind of like in-game cursor is not really tracking it super well. Just pretty evident that obviously, you know, while frame generation is kind of cool, as I'm getting stuck on geometry, I'm not sure we're actually supposed to be up here, but while it is cool and it is cool tech, not really something that you're going to want to use for a competitive experience like Battlefield, in my opinion. In fact, the latency, I'll be honest with you, is really bad here, so wouldn't recommend 4x at all. Obviously, if you bump down to 3x or 2x, you get a bit more frames and a bit less latency compared to, you know, not using any frame generation. Obviously 4x is going to give you the most frames, but wouldn't really recommend it across the board in my personal opinion. But if you're curious, here it is. All right, let's check out now quickly here. I won't spend too much time on this again. The high preset, we're playing at native TAA, so this is the 4K high preset native. All right, so now with the high preset, you can see obviously running into pretty major performance issues here, so right around 40 FPS. Again, we'll just jump straight over to ultra performance to see if this is savable. Obviously, we're not far off from 60 FPS, so we could probably inch our way there, maybe get there on performance or balanced, but we are definitely in the position where this is approaching, or if not approaching, already at pretty much unplayable territory, this kind of slideshow territory, especially for a multiplayer first-person shooter like Battlefield. So not a huge surprise. I mean, again, the 5060 is not a 4K card necessarily, and 4K at high settings native resolution is difficult for a lot of GPUs, so nothing against the 5060. This is a well-optimized game generally, you know, compared to other games in the market, but definitely leaving a lot to be desired here, and not really a super playable experience, hovering right around 35 FPS average here at 4K high. So we'll see if we can save this situation with, you know, with a bit of DLSS here, though still think might be a little less than we want. So we're going to go straight over, like I said, to DLSS Ultra Performance. So this is the, you know, most aggressive form of upscaling. And as you can see, even with the upscaling here at Ultra Performance, I mean, image looks great. You can see even like fine details, you know, barbed wire. In motion, it looks a little weird, but generally just like looking at it, looks very, very well defined and looks good. But we are still sub 60 FPS. Not super surprising, but it does look like you're going to have to stay over on that medium preset if you want to play at 4K, which honestly, like I said, you know, this game doesn't look super, super different between medium and high. I don't think it's really, you know, end of the world difference here. In fact, you know, I'd say it's somewhat of a no-brainer whether or not to play at medium or high settings. You know, you can probably still, you know, play, have some fun, get some kills, as I'm getting teabagged here. I'm making a video, guys, but obviously probably not where you'd want to play at. Over here at 4K high is going to be pretty much, you know, out of the realm of really what's comfortable for this particular GPU. And lastly here, just out of morbid curiosity, I actually didn't really test the Ultra preset on the other settings, but let's just see if we could break the GPU. So now going for Ultra graphics preset here at native using TAA, just out of curiosity, see what we can do here. And now on the Ultra preset, surprisingly enough, you know, moving over to Ultra doesn't really seem to change our FPS a ton from high, where we were getting like around 35 FPS. Now we're getting maybe like a few FPS lower. So obviously, you know, still not really where you want to be at, but if you're curious, you know, what the max settings at native TAA would look like on this particular GPU. It's around 30 FPS. So whether or not that's playable, my opinion, most people's opinion, I wouldn't say so. Strangely enough, our video memory, I'm not sure if it's like reading correctly, but seems like this would definitely cause issues to our video memory. And okay, that was bad. But as I've tested other GPUs, it definitely uses over 7 gigabytes of video memory, 4K ultra settings. So I know that something is definitely going on with our video memory, but strangely enough, our 1% lows are still kind of sitting right about where I would expect. It is possible that the fewer frames is resulting in less video memory. Like it's almost like a cycle, like we're not able to generate the frames, so it's not using the video memory, and the video memory is causing the lack of frames. Could be that. Could be a number of things. Could also just be, and likely is just the actual architecture of the card not able to really keep up. But just out of curiosity here, let's see what we can do with a bit of DLSS. So first things first, just coming in here, obviously turning on DLSS straight to ultra performance, using the most aggressive upscaling, and honestly is not really saving us all that much. Still sitting well below 60 FPS and really in no position to really be engaging in a multiplayer title at these kinds of frames. And again, just out of morbid curiosity, let's go ahead and throw on 4x frame generation, and now we're getting artificially, of course, but around 140 frames per second. Incredibly terrible latency, super noticeable. But if you wanted to just play the game single player, just wanted to run around, if the latency doesn't bother you, can you fake it and get a competitive FPS, 120 plus FPS at 4K max settings on the 5060? You can if you have the right CPU pairing, but it's not going to be a super great experience. Anyways guys, that's been it for the 5060 in Battlefield 6 open beta. Honestly, really impressed with the card, to be honest. Performed better than I was expecting at 1080p and 1440p. You can really play in native resolution across any setting and get 60 plus FPS at both 1080p and 1440p. And the fact that it has the transform model gives us a ton of flexibility to both, boost that FPS and also get a really great looking picture. So I'm definitely happy to see that. As far as the frame generation, obviously not something that I would really recommend. I imagine most people really wouldn't be interested in that, but it is there for those that want it, and that may come in handy if you want to just crank the visuals for a single player campaign and then turn them back down when it comes to the multiplayer. And surprisingly enough, no issues to our 1% lows. Battlefield 6 has been a super fun game to benchmark. Been really cranking out these videos because the game honestly is just really well optimized, and maybe not well optimized like compared to some older games, but compared to modern releases, it's super unusual to see a game that both looks and performs so well. So definitely really pleased and happy to test this game out, and looking forward to checking out the rest of the GPUs on this title, hoping to get through a batch of them before the beta goes offline. Anyways guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.